Healing of the Heart podcast. I gotta tell you, I almost didn't come on to the podcast this evening. I almost canceled it. And I was making up all kinds of excuses in my mind, talking myself out of it because I don't know, sometimes I don't know if you can relate to this, but even when you have purpose, sometimes, that purpose sometimes gets kind of I don't know, like, is it really working? Is it really worth it? And I ask these questions in my mind and I'm like, okay, and then I answer out loud. I'm like, you know what? I really have to pay attention to my whys, and I hope you do the same. And so yeah, I almost didn't come onto the podcast. And sometimes I don't know for you, maybe you're carrying you're living out your purpose every day, and you're like, why am I doing this again? um, and before I got onto the podcast, I prayed. I always try to pray. I'm not perfect at it. I'm not perfect at anything. But I typically pray before I do anything, whether I'm doing my podcast, or if I'm, getting ready to go into a session, or if I'm getting ready to speak to someone. I really try to go inside and inner and try to hear, how I need to, go about things. So the podcast is no different. And so, before I got on, I was like, Lord, I hope that, you know, somebody will be helped. One person, you know, um, yeah, that's my heart's desire. And that's my why. And it's really important that we remember our whys, especially when we're not, feeling like our greatest. I had a really, really busy week, really, really busy week. It was a trying week this week. And, that's the thing. When we have work and purpose, it keeps us really occupied, properly occupied. And it brings us, joy and fulfillment because all of us, none of us are exempt from hardships and from stressors and, from disappointments. You often hear me say that from time to time. And this podcast, I really get to be authentic. I don't change, like even my sessions, of course, there is a line of professionalism and I'll continue to keep that here, but it doesn't stop me from, being human. The human phenomenon is for real. And I really want to connect with every woman and girl that's listening to this podcast whenever you listen to this podcast. This is a good time to say thank you for supporting Healing of the Heart podcast. And so now I'm going to go into, the podcast, what we always do, our intro piece. And I can't get tired of doing it because, I can't take for granted that maybe you're listening to the podcast for the first time. And so, yeah, this podcast came out of my first book, Healing of the Heart. I'll keep that introduction short because by now everybody gets to know that by now. You can skip this part if you already know it. If you are part of our community already, just skip this part because you already know what it is. But I still got to do it, right? It's just right. It's ethical. So yeah, this podcast came out of Healing of the Heart, and I have to tell you, I did not come up with the idea to do the podcast. One of the women from the NBHI community, I worked with her for a while. And she said, you know what? Your book is really, she said, you need to publish your book and then you also need to do a podcast. I wish I could say her name, but I can't because of confidentiality. But she's like, you really should do that. I think it would really help a lot of, other women, and she was very, kind and encouraging to say that the work we've done together really, it has been really helpful in my life. And I really believe that you should carry that forward. It's amazing how other people can also help you to develop and find your purpose. And I have to say that this woman did, and I really appreciate her. And she knows who she is. So that's where this podcast came from. So basically, this podcast has a lot to do with, looking at the formation of the self, because, hey, that's really serious stuff and how it shapes your life and basically how that shaping, shows up in your life every day and what you can do about it. So Healing Up the Heart podcast is about, changing stuff, changing how we function, changing how we approach our relationships, change how we think, change how we connect to ourselves. Because if we can ever become that better version of ourselves, regardless of the stressors and, problems and disappointments, we're still moving forward and we're still moving forward to living that better life, that better self, that better us. And so that's this podcast. And I love saying that because you know what? I get to do the same thing every day. I get to do that for myself, and that's really cool. And in the lives of my children. And I love that. So that's that. So if you're listening for the first time, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy that you're here. And thank you for joining me. And for those persons who don't listen live, but you download the podcast, thank you so much for encouraging me, right? That's the first thing, because that's how it works too, is reciprocity. And I hope that continues. I really believe in that. I really do. And speaking of listeners, I looked a couple days ago and I saw that we have listeners in Canada, in Bolivia, and in the Philippines. And I forgot, it's another country. I can't remember. Hope I'm not forgetting anyone. But as I see different countries popping up on the podcast, I promise that I'm going to mention that because I want you to know that I appreciate you listening and I appreciate you supporting Healing of the Heart podcast. And in turn, that this podcast is supporting you. So thank you for doing that. And I hope that you'll continue to share the podcast. So that takes me then to my why, right? So I forgot to share that. So before I came on, I was sharing that I was just, preparing my mind and meditating and praying. I'm like, and then I'm reminded that this podcast actually help others. It helps. One of my cousin's daughter, Madison, she was visiting this afternoon. Madison, if you're listening, thank you. Madison is 13, I think. If I got it wrong, forgive me, cousin. I'm sorry. And she said, you know what? Because I was getting ready to, put my podcast equipment together. And she said, oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot you have a podcast. And she said, I was on last week. And she said, it was really helpful, actually. Kids are honest, right? No, I didn't say anything about what I was about to do. She just watched me pick up my gear and she's like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to go set up for my podcast. And she was like, well, I listened last week, and last week's topic was emergent adults, Caribbean background and impacts on mental health. And of course, we're from the Caribbean, but they were born here. But my cousin were, have Caribbean parents. And she's like, you know what? She says, I saw that you had some people on, but it wasn't a lot. And that topic right there, you need to advertise it because I think a whole lot more people would be really helped by what you were talking about. I said, oh, that really touched me, right? 13 years old. And so that's another thing I got to tell you. I love working with teens because they really have a lot to say. And I mean, just think back. What were you like when you were 13? Do you remember where you were? I can tell you. It was a tough time for me. And I wish people were asking me questions about, how are you? What do you want to do? And so our conversation, expanded to other things. And I got a chance to ask her more things, and I was like, man, I wish people and adults were asking me stuff like that. It would make me feel important at the time. And so, Madison, thank you for the conversation. And, I hope that other teens will listen to this podcast too and, share that with them because they have a lot to say. They have a lot of valuable things to share and that we can take in. So, yeah, it's, talking about our whys and the purpose. And so, yeah, hopefully I gave a good or a quick interview rather as to what this podcast is about. I take the time to do that because I really want you to connect. Even my work that I do every day, at the end of my sessions, I say, you know what? Hey, do we connect today? And I'm like, hey, you have the freedom just to be honest. And sometimes most times I get yes. And sometimes every now and then someone is very brave and say, no, I think we missed something. I'm like, oh, well, let's pause. Let's talk about that. What did I miss? Did I not hear you? And I get to hear what I missed. Right. And so I take my time to connect. So if there's something that I said that perhaps you didn't connect with, or maybe it was disturbing or upsetting, or maybe brought some curiosity, hey, send me a message, k.henry at nbhi-llc.net, k.henry at nbhi-llc.net. And if you're wondering what NBHI stands for, that's my practice. It's called New Beginning Healing Institute, hence Healing of the Heart, hence this podcast. Let's take a few minutes break, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, play my other song by Chandler Moore that says, I'm a lean on. I can't even sing that much anymore. I mean, I have to really wait for my voice to come back. But, I love Chandler Moore. And I'm going to play one of his songs. And then when we come back, what we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about disclosures, how to, prepare yourself for the podcast, things that we'll talk about and, how to keep yourself safe while we're talking about maybe difficult things like this topic tonight. We're going to do that. And then we'll just jump right in. And I think that'll do it. That'll keep us going here. Um, Chandler Moore, Amelina. Why does this person plays all these maybe religious or spiritual songs? So you know what? This is I like to always when something pops in my heart, I'm like I'm going to go with that. So you know, research, right? Research consistently finds that spirituality is among the most effective coping mechanisms that people have for coping with adversity, right? Yeah. Research consistently shows that religiosity or spirituality is among the most effective coping mechanism for when we're facing stressors or, difficult times in our lives. And so, it's a way of so what does it do? It's a way of what's the word? Maybe reevaluate. I didn't say reevaluate, I said reevaluate, like do it again. To reappraise then, in our in social work, we like to use the word reframe. It's a way of reframing our experience in a greater context. So it gives us space. It gives us room then, right? It gives us the ability to provide some kind of sense, some kind of mastery and control in the face of difficult things. So you don't feel like you're completely powerless. Think about that, right? So if you're wondering, when you listen to this podcast and you hear a lot of religious, if you characterize it as such, or maybe spiritual songs, because that's one of my most effective coping mechanisms. It brings me a lot of joy, it brings me a lot of happiness, and it works, right? So there's science to it too. So for people that say, well, I have no use for the supernatural, well, for you folks that really rely on science 100%, then this is good information for you then that, and I get it, a lot of times people have contamination in their spiritual lives and, with religion. Hint, hint, been there, done that. Healing of the Heart in that book, I talk a lot about that, especially well, actually in the prose and the poetry sections of the book, dealing with those things and how that really contaminated the self and how that affected my belief. By the way, second book is on its way. Ha ha! It's underway. I started writing the second book. I won't even tell you the title of it yet. I'm gonna keep that quiet, but that little thing that I just said just kind of like jolted my memory to say that. Just in case you're wondering, right? All right. So before we went on the break, I said that we're going to go into reminding us. So the podcast, right? The topic tonight is women with tears. I don't know if any of us women or girls are exempt from this topic. We're not. And that's a broad topic, right? And I'm going to cover, so, it's so large that we cannot possibly conceivably cover a lot of reasons why, women have tears. I mean, we have tears for a lot of things. I mean, oh my goodness, listen to prior podcasts. We talked about grief, as a matter of fact, we talk about, postpartum. I mean, we talk about, oh my goodness, all kinds of, events in our lives, over time that cause us to cry. I mean, again, tears are not doesn't mean that it's always sad, but we can have happy tears too. I mean, I have happy tears. I work with persons that have happy and sad tears. So again, you get the point that women with tears is a pretty broad topic. But tonight we're going to be talking about looking at women being oppressed from the beginning of time, right? But particularly women of color. This episode will look at the historical oppression of women of color by their counterparts. Well, who are those counterparts? Oh, well, other women of color, white women. And, this oppression takes place, in social, economic, and political context, right? And if we're going to look at the history of this, there are a few things that might get a little heavy tonight. So, yeah, so this podcast, right? Remember what it's not about blaming. So, it's not because blaming is not healing. I love that. That's one of my favorite poems in the book. Blaming is not healing. You keep doing that, you're not going to heal, you're not going to grow. Okay. You're just going to be one angry, bitter person. And so, what this podcast does, though, is take a look at things and, again, provide room, space to be curious and ask questions. So, rather than just internalizing things over time without questioning them, then you're not doing anything but just turning it over and pointing fingers at other persons and perhaps yourself, which is being judgmental of yourself and others. And so this podcast is not about blaming people. It's not about being angry at folks. Yes, your anger and emotions are legitimate, but you got to do something productive and healthy with that. And so this podcast seeks to, again, look on the inside. We want to connect with ourselves. And sometimes when we're talking about things, that can be very difficult to do. And so, no different than if I'm in my sessions, we we find ways to ground ourselves. And if anything we're talking about perhaps may become upsetting for you or triggering, I politely ask that you turn off the podcast. If you're as you're listening and it's your download is upset, stop, pause. Uh, go play some music. Music is very healing. It's a way of distracting yourself, and it's very calming. Do something the opposite of what we're talking about. Maybe listen to some comedy instead. Maybe take a warm shower, a warm bath, drink a cup of tea. Tea is very calming. Step outside, do some breath work, some deep breathing, okay, to ground yourself if this gets upsetting. And again, ultimately, if it's too much, you can just shut this podcast off, like just turn it off. Do not pass go. Do not collect any more information from this podcast. So I mixed it up a little bit. I kind of shared what this podcast is not, but also what it is. So I gave it the topic tonight. And we just don't sit and just talk about things. Again, we really want to be productive with the information. And again, my goal is to connect with somebody or with persons out there. Because tonight I'm going to share some of my personal stories and how I was oppressed as a woman by other women of color. In fact, I have my experience is a little bit unique because in my career, I have been helped by white women and not women of color. That's true. My mentors, and I can call their names, they know who they are because I talk to them all the time. One of my mentors, she's a white woman. Her name is Sharon Cohen. Okay, and she was my first placement supervisor, and I did my internship, my clinical rotation. Yeah, she's white, and she's still my mentor today. And the other one was Donna Donato. She is, I believe, Donna's Cuban and Puerto Rican, right? So she's a minority, but I mean, we can always argue about different parts of her ethnicity and her background and why she may be this or that. But essentially, I did not have women of color to help to support or promote me as I came up in the ranks of social work and as a clinician. I did not have that. That is the truth. And I somewhere along the line when I was going through being oppressed, I said, I want to find a channel. I want to find an outlet to be able to talk about this because I am certain that I am not the only person, only woman of color that have been oppressed by other women of color. I mean, it's pretty profound actually. And so my experience, and from the Caribbean too, but my experience, and I've been oppressed by other women that are from the Caribbean too, right? So we're going to look at the history of this, right? And where this came from, how this shows up today, political, social, economic context. When I say economic, I mean like, your job, on a smaller scale, but, and of course, expanding out to maybe, as a business owner, businesses, how are we impacted, right? And so oppression is real. And then, so we're going to take a look at those parts of it tonight. So I'm trying to narrow our focus then in terms of what the topic is about women with tears. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And so I'm going to start off with, we're going to transition then into reading a quote. But before I read the quote, I want to know, as I explained, hopefully I explained in a clear fashion, though, what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I've already, introduced or gave you a hint to why this topic is so dear to my heart and why I feel we need to talk about it. So before I read the quote to you, I just want to pause here and say, it's raining outside. Oh my goodness, it's raining. Just want to pause and say, I don't know who you are listening right now or who will listen to the podcast, whether you're a woman of color or, you know, um, a white woman, you're on the other side of things. What's your take on this? How do you relate to this topic? Do you connect with this? And it's interesting. I'll ask this other question too, is that, for example, as a woman of color, I've been oppressed by, women of color and by white females. In fact, recently I had a situation, we'll talk about that too. But how do you connect to this topic? How do you do that? So I want you to think about that. And while I get my quote over here. So I believe it was Dale Carnegie who coined this quote says, fear is effectively cured by forced repetition of acts of courage. Read that again. I found this quote when I was reading I forgot which of his books because he has several books. It says fear is effectively cured by forced repetition of acts of courage. I like that. What do you think about that quote tonight? I like it because you know what? This topic that we're getting ready to talk about, I was nervous to come on to this podcast now. I'm like, am I really going to take this topic on? But I know it's so relevant, and I know it happens, because it happened to me, and it has happened to some women that I've worked with, right here in Palm Beach County, and this stuff still goes on. As women, we have become such oppressors and such bullies when we've risen to high-ranking executive positions, and sometimes we forget where we are coming from, and that we too were oppressed, or our ancestors were oppressed at one time or another, and then we turn around and do it to each other, and then causing people to have a lot of fear, and to lose courage, and to lose the sense of self in terms of being this agency, to be able to move about our lives. And so I think this quote is really appropriate. If you listen to this podcast, really, I let me know how you relate to this topic. But again, I think this quote is appropriate to continue our podcast, but to consider that this stuff really causes a lot of fear. A lot of fear. You're not even sure what to do with your life, or if you should even continue with your career, because such oppression by women is pretty sad. All right. So, what should we do? Let's continue then. So, women with tears. Now, let me just start this part of the podcast talking about tears, right? So tears is it's a human expression of emotion. It is, right? Tears can be shed due to, like I said before, it's such a large topic. I mean, you can be crying for a variety of reasons, sadness, joy, frustration, or pain. I mean, it's just which is, like when I'm working, I say to folks sometimes, if you're listening, I do this. I'm like, so tell me, what do those tears possibly mean? Because you know what? We need to be asking questions. We need to be asking. I think that this is what I think. I think in in the workplace, just like at school, they have, bullying campaign. If you're being bullied, you should report that. I think in workplaces that we should, hey, if a woman's being bullied, you should report that to your HR. Let us know if you're being bullied by another woman. I like it. What do you think? Honestly, I really do. So yeah, tears can be for a variety of reasons. So we shouldn't be going around interpreting for people, but we should ask. And women should really feel comfortable, really feel comfortable being able to share, why they're crying. But we all know that that's in our world today, and in our world for a very long time, we are stigmatized because we are seen as either weak, and of course we're seen by men that way too, primarily. We're not going to get the gender stereotypes tonight, but gender expression stereotypes, although some of it really will be a part of what we're talking about. That's not our focus though. But, you know, some people, particularly men and some women too, depending on the culture or background, to say, oh, what I cry for? And that's in patois. Well, to you. Crying is weak. Well, well, I just had a flashback. When I was growing up, we used to get spankings. Oh, I cry, you, I cry. In other words, you shouldn't be crying. Stop crying, okay? So the more you cry is the more spanking you used to get. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So crying can be looked upon as weak. You're being irrational, or you're being overly dramatic. In other words, you shouldn't be crying. But really, uh, crying is a human phenomenon, right? They're natural. It's a natural process. And not to say all cultures, perceive it as negative. For some, it's natural. It's a healthy way to express emotions. I believe in this country, in the United States, I believe we're on our way to accepting that. We're changing those narratives day by day. And I'm also hoping that this podcast will be adding to being a place where we're also helping to, foster change. But yeah, as women, we're often stereotyped again, so stereotyping, right? As being more emotional and sensitive than men. So here's the next thing about that. I'm gonna touch on that, I'm gonna drop it, I'm not gonna push it, right? But then so this creates another a segment of the population where they're not allowed to express themselves. So if a man cries, so we as women, we're weak, we're emotional, we're irrational, etc., etc. And if a man tries to show, tears or to show his sensitivity, oh, well, he's men are looked down upon too. It's frowned upon. Oh, you're acting like a girl. You're a sissy. So that also leads to other mental health impacts and affective disorders in men. It's pretty for real, right? So where in society then do tears belong? Where almost if you listen to that kind of narrative or that kind of instruction by society institutions, it's almost like tears fit just doesn't fit anywhere. So where do we put that, right? So here's the next thing too. So yeah, so it's we're stigmatized by showing emotions or expressing them. We're this, we're that as women, and of course men too. They're not share their emotions because they're sissies and they're girls. So if you're a girl, y- if you're a girl, only girls cry. You're a sissy. So you see it. You see how the double edge on that. If you're a girl, you're supposed to cry, but if you're a girl and you cry, then you're weak, you're irrational, and you're dramatic. Oh my gosh. So basically, you have a lot of us in society today. We're just stopped up. We're blocked up. We have a lot of, difficult and negative emotions that we're carrying around. And so, Women with Tears, I think, is so appropriate. And again, we're speaking specifically tonight about how women oppress other women and the impacts of that. So that's just an introduction to, just to identify, about tears and how women are perceived, men too, but we're not talking about men tonight, but how we're perceived and where does this really come from? Okay, I think I hinted it already because from the patriarchal standpoint, where all these things I mentioned before, so they've already set the tone from the beginning of time as to what healthy emotions look like and what does not. And quite frankly, there's nothing healthy about what they're proposing, if you noticed, right? And that has really far-reaching effects today. So think about that. So I gave you the quote to ponder, and I gave the question for you to think about, how do you relate to this topic? How do you connect? You know what? Maybe you can't connect to this topic. Maybe as a woman, you've had it good. You've had it easy. In your career, maybe you're a stay-at-home mom and you never had to be in a workplace and to really, face these obstacles or, these types of issues. Maybe you are I don't know, you just had it good, you had it lucky, you weren't oppressed by another woman. Maybe you're a white female and you don't know what it's like to be oppressed by other women, because typically research shows that white women are very favored and have been favored, the favored one from the beginning of time. We're going to talk about some history on that too, and that so I'll stop there, right? So how do you connect? So do you connect at all? Maybe you don't. Maybe you know someone who does. I don't know. We're gonna pause a little bit again. Then when we come back, we're gonna look a little bit at the history then behind women oppressing women, women of color oppressing women, their own kind, or white women oppressing women of color. So we'll look a little bit of both of that when we get back. So let's play a little bit more music. This is Naomi Rain again. I like her voice. Let's see. Yeah, I do like her voice a lot. She's really, really good. Here we go. How you feel about this topic tonight? I don't know.
I I wake up and get to work. I don't have time to make my bed, and I can't
All right, guys, I'm
remember
back.
what.
So I like Naomi Rain. She's also part of Maverick City, so you can check her out too. She's all part of Chandler Moore. I love her voice. Very calming, very soothing, very encouraging. So I don't know. How are you connecting with this topic? Do you have some stories of your own? I'm sure you do. And if you don't, then I'm pretty sure you've heard maybe other women talk about these things. They come home maybe hotter than fish grease one day from work because, this and that and the third happened with this supervisor, this female supervisor that just keeps saying this or keeps doing this or, you know, yeah, it happens. It really happens. So let's look at some history on this. So, I had mentioned, I kind of gave a hint to this earlier. We talked about, how patriarchy, right? Men. And, so we can't pin everything on, whiteness or, white men or white females, although, yeah, they have a lot to do with it. But what happened before them, right? And so, I was thinking about, and a lot of historical data, talks about how, women have been oppressed from the beginning of time, which is why I wrote the way I did. But primarily, though, women of color, Black women, um, so slave trade and being enslaved as a woman from the beginning of time. When I say beginning of time, I'm talking out of I think we can all agree by now. There's a lot of literature that supports the fact that civilization started out of Africa. Okay, now, by the way, you see what's going on in Sudan? Okay, there's a lot of uprising in Sudan. And do we know what do we know about Sudan? Sudan was called Nubia because I did some research on this because I'm looking at what's repeating in history right now. What's going on? Why is this uprising in Sudan, so important? Why should we pay attention to that? So I started doing some research, not even knowing that it would actually connect with the topic tonight. I had no idea. And that was like a little confirmation for me that this topic is so really important. And so Sudan was called the Nubia, Nubia. And I said, oh, okay. And so Nubia was the center of slave trade. It was a center of slave trade. And so they sold a lot of the black princes in Sudan sold a lot of their own black people, especially black women, into slavery. So yes, and I did some research on that, and I was like, I often growing up in school, you hear about that, and you don't read so much of that, but you do hear about that, and as you get older and go through college, depending on the kind of literature, if you're reading, from negritude writers or you're reading from colonial or European writers, the information is presented differently. But if you pay attention, you will see that Sudan, Nubia was called Nubia, was the center for slave trade, and a lot of the black princes and the black pharaohs, and some of the Bible, the stories in there, we think it's made up. It's not. It's pretty on point. So it was a center for slave trade, and of course, I don't want to get too much into the history of slave trade per se, but want to make it relevant or related to the topic. And the point I want to get across here is that Black women were sold into slavery many times over and over and over again to different countries, whether that was Asia, whether that was, the Dutch. It didn't matter. They were sold into slavery many, many times. And what happened as a result then and is that and of course there are invasions too. There are invasions in Egypt, and there's invasions in Ethiopia, there's invasions everywhere in Africa, by other by imperialists. And so you had, not only were they selling the women in some of these invasions too, we became casualties and commodities really. And so a lot of women of color, they were raped, right? And so then you have now not only black women, now you have brown women, brown children. So now there comes the term black and brown people. And so you have a lot of these things that were taking place. And so now you have brown women, right? Brown children. And so women, black women over time, we've been sold by our own, sold into slavery to colonialists or to, you know, um, to other countries, non-black persons. And so we have not been protected. We've never been protected from the beginning of time. When I read these things in literature, it's so disappointing. It's so disappointing to see. And then on top of that, when these black women had when they gave birth to their children became, of course, what we call today biracial. But then these kids now become, this lighter skin or lighter hue, and they form a social class wherein and they grow up to feel like they're better than their black mothers, and so they in turn mistreat their black mothers. They in turn have more privilege, um, equal to their white rulers, or colonialism, or colonialists, I should say. And so over time, Black women have lost their place from their own to others. We've lost our sense of worth, we've lost our identity, we've never really had protection. And so this is really important to stress. I'm not sure how many of us really pay attention to this information, right? So we've been sold into slavery many times over from the very beginning of time. We've never been protected. Now, the opposite of that is true. So that is not to say that white women were never oppressed. Yes, they were, and that is true. They were very oppressed. And they were their mistresses to a lot of white rulers and white slave owners. So, they were oppressed and impoverished, in many instances. But what happened is, so what did they do to alleviate some of their plight and some of, their restraints, right? What did they do? Well, you know what? And that this is the thing that I want to come get across, is that a lot of our history books don't talk about that. But we're, as blacks or black women, we're so quick to point to, you know um you know racism, because racism obviously is about power and access, and that's what we're talking about essentially. um a lot of here's what I want to get across, so I don't get too much into the history on this, just enough to relate to the topic tonight. Is that so? What white women had to do then? They also joined the ranks. I'm not sure they had to, but they did. The way how the literature is written, it's almost like they had to, but they joined with the white men who actually oppressed them, and they also joined in further oppressing black women. They were very instrumental. Fast forward now in the late 19th to 20th century, they were very instrumental in helping white men to segregate schools, to segregate, very much schools, segregate schools. They impacted housing. Oh my goodness, they impacted housing significantly. And jobs, which that still happens. Some of what we're talking about still happens today, based on policies that are written. And so you think about it, right? This is why it is said in almost every literature, a black woman is the most oppressed woman in the world. This is why. This is why. And history proves that from the very beginning, we oppress our own. We had our own black kings and queens that were selling us. Then their invasions, right? So we're sold. And then fast forward into 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century in this country, when slave trade was, I mean, just big, right? And of course, we know what the primary place for that was, in Sudan, which is, it was called Nubia, right? And so a lot of times, I don't know, maybe we're confused about where this came from. Well, this is where it comes from, right? So we've been sold many times over, and in some instances, I feel like we're still being sold. And then now we turn around and we do it to each other. You know, what else I want to say here before I continue, or segue rather? So Jim Crow came in, and of course, we know what Jim Crow is. Jim Crow is a pejorative term, a negative term for African Americans. I don't even like the term African Americans. In fact, when I speak to Black women who are from this country, a lot of Black women don't like to be called African American. That's a whole nother podcast. But anyway, so essentially, so when Jim Crow came in, right, came into to effect, right, again, segregating schools and housing, white women were they were strong advocates for this kind of behavior. They really helped to, I mean, they're a big part of the Ku Klux Klan too. Now, how many textbooks talk about that? How many? And this is not to demonize white women, obviously, but we want to look at the history. When we have all these Karens. Did I get that right? Kerens. Oh, you don't belong in this country. I mean, they really spit on a black woman every chance they get, or a woman that's, not their color. So just imagine this is happening in social contexts. I mean, we often see videos of this. We often see, in the supermarkets, in people's communities. I mean, on the job, it's a little bit. I mean, we have this on, in even professional settings, wherein women of color are just bullied, put down, or just harassed, right? And again, so we have, white women who do this, and we also have black women who do the same thing. So the point of this podcast is to take a look at the history of this. We need to understand the history of this, how this continues to show up today, and what we can do about that. So I think it's important to understand, again, I think, for example, there's some women that don't have understanding or have knowledge about. I mean, just stop and think. Why is it, because oftentimes we're all women and we all need to support each other and we need to join the cause. But and then when we find that, women, who are of color, that look like us, don't join or support our cause, we often, and again, I mean, why would she not support my cause? Right? And again, this is just one small, lens on this. I mean, I'm sure there are other reasons why, but this is a maybe not a small, this is a broader lens, and I'm sure there are other smaller lenses, I should say, that we can use to approach this topic. I'm using the biggest one tonight. We're looking at history on this. So let me just reverse that because that's more accurate to say. But why is that woman joining my cause? Or why would this white female, she's female for crying out loud, why is she not supporting my cause? Why is she not? Right? So the idea tonight is to, I don't know, bring awareness around this topic. Begin to, so there's no need for us to, sometimes as women, and I'll say as a black woman, you often say, do I deserve to be in this spot? Sometimes we're made to feel like, we have this, what they call now the imposter syndrome. Do I deserve to be here? Sometimes, we're made to feel like we don't fit in, or, uh, I'm the only person of color here. Why am I here? Or, we just can't seem to find our place. Well, you know what? That's not new. That's not new. Our identity has been chipped at for so many years, decades, hundreds of years, and so oftentimes we still feel like that. It's not. It's just doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from somewhere, and unfortunately, it continues. It perpetuates. Right. All right. Take another pause. So, what we're going to talk about when we come back? We're going to share stories when I get back. I'm going to share my own stories. I'll try to redact some parts of it because it is pretty sensitive, but I'm going to share some of my personal stories about what I've experienced from other women of color and also from white women, but I'll also share my positive stories too about how I've been helped. And so we're going to pause here and we're going to play, I don't know, let's play something upbeat. This is a tough topic tonight. We're going to play the song called Safe, and this is by Naomi Rain. I was listening to Naomi sing that song, Don't Listen to Those Lies. I think that was a good time to do. We're going to start doing our affirmations on here. You know what? I think that's a great idea. Do you have affirmations? Do you have ways of affirming yourself? I have mine. And, in my work, most, if not all, the women that I work with or have worked with, they have affirmations. We really work on them. We work on, changing the talk, the self-talk that we have, the self-talk that perhaps we've been given by so many other people and circumstances and environments like what we're talking about. And some of the stuff can be generational and historical, right? And so now is a good time to do our affirmations. So I'm going to do mine, right? And so my affirmations, they go like this. Number one, Keisha Moran, that's my maiden name. Keisha Moran, you are a beautiful person inside and out. You're intelligent and you're smart. You're strong and you're bold. And you're meant to be here. That was kind of weak. Let's do it again. So Keisha Morant Henry, my full name. I'm not in trouble, right? Keisha Morant Henry. You are a precious person. You're beautiful inside and out. You're intelligent and you're smart. You're strong and you're bold. And you're meant to be here. Keisha Morant, you are a precious person. Beautiful inside and out. You're intelligent and you're smart. You're strong and you're bold, and you're meant to be here. What do we say? Let's give an applause for that. I love that. I love it, love it, love it, love it. You know what? I do that pretty much every I do it every morning. I do it when I first wake up, and I do it again around 12:50 because my alarm. If you ever in session with me here, my phone goes off. You know what time it is. It's my alarm. It's my affirmation. Sometimes when I have it go off at home, my kids will say, "Mom, what's that? What's that? What's that? Turn it off. Turn it off." Oh, and my husband will say, "Yeah, that's her affirmations." Yeah, right. You know what? I don't teach what I don't practice. That's hypocritical. So I think it's important that our self-talk matters because we have so many negative, information, images, all kinds of stuff, interactions that we take in on a daily basis. And no wonder why the scripture says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Because if you can renew your mind, renew it every day, then you'll have a better self-talk. You'll have a better way of thinking about things, better cognition, and of course that yields, better decisions rather and better actions. So it's important to do that. So I hope that you found that piece to be helpful and that you will come up with your own affirmations that can help to positively affirm yourself. Now, we were talking about before the break, we're talking about some, historical pieces on, women oppressing women. So it comes from somewhere. We learned that. I mean, we learned these things. We can also get spiritual on that. I won't take into the spiritual lens tonight. We'll be on here for like a whole nother hour. Can't do that. So we're just looking at, history of human relatedness. If I had to categorize what we're talking about, it's human to human relatedness. So human to human relatedness was diminished. When you sell people into slavery because of greed, power, and wealth, because that's what it came down to. Let's just be clear. So the topic tonight talked about, women oppressing women, looking at the context of political, economic, and social context. Yeah, when you really look at these contexts, it all comes down to power, wealth, and greed. That's what it comes down to. So that's why we are here and why we're still talking about this. And I imagine that we'll talk about this forever because it's something that we constantly have to work at. And that's why awareness around this topic is really important. Not only awareness, but also action. So, tears, right? So, Black women and women of color, we're not the only ones crying. Okay. But remember, tears is generally is supposed to be healthy. It's cathartic. It's a way to release. Again, I had mentioned earlier, we talked about when I'm working, I ask women, I ask them, I say, hey, what do those tears mean? Maybe, possibly. Why? Why do I say maybe or possibly? Because I don't know. I don't know. And I want to know. Why do I want to know? Because I want to connect with the person. I mean, come on, right? So maybe you can try that. If someone's crying, don't assume they're crying because you're sad. I mean, could be, right? But still ask, hey, how you doing? What I see you're crying. Can I give you a hug? Or is it safe to hug or safe to ask you what's going on? What's going on? Can I help you? You know, it's nice to ask, and it's nice to be asked too. So let's flip things a little bit. So we talked about the history on this, right? We look at you know where this all came from, how it started, and how it still continues. And I want to continue on that part. Sorry for the pun, but how this continues. So tears. It's interesting in today's time, right? As I mentioned earlier, Black women, we can't cry. We're not allowed to. We're weak. And in addition to being weak and irrational, we're looked upon as bullies if we cry, if we try to cry or talk about what we're experiencing. In fact, you know, um, in the American Medical Association, it talks about how there's evidence that shows that a lot of medical doctors do not treat women of color. We don't get proper care. I mean, you have celebrities talking about this, like Serena, Beyonce, when they gave birth to their children. They had high risk pregnancies, and some things in their care was missed. And this is you can look it up. It was talked about. So once again, women of color were treated differently. In social arenas. I mean, now look at these two women. I mean, they're wealthy women. They're rich, right? I mean, they're well known, and they still did not get proper care, prenatal care. That's a big deal. As a matter of fact, infant mortality rate is very high in this country, and we're not a third world country. We're a first world country. So why is infant mortality rate so high when We have like the best technology and supposedly the best healthcare. Well, of course, I think Denmark is number one. I think we're number 8 or 9 or 10, somewhere down the list in terms of medical care. But the point I'm making here is that we shouldn't have infant mortality rates so high among women of color or ethnic minority women. We should not, but we do. And that's because women of color are still looked upon like we have been looked upon from back in Sudan, back in Nubia. We're just expendable. We're not worth much. You know what I mean? We're just not. It just hurts me to even say that, but this is the presentation. This is the narrative. This is the history on this. And so this is still happening. It's happening in social context. It's happening, in how we receive medical care. It's happening in our employment. We if we apply for positions, we don't get those higher positions. So we're female and we're women of color. This is why the stereotype that we're not regarded as anything. We're relegated then to lower positions or a lower view. We're just not highly looked upon. We're not beautiful. If you look in the media, when they say when they put a picture of a beautiful woman, that woman is not black. She's often white or she's exotic looking and she has straight hair, literally, right? So even in the media, black women are portrayed as we're just not good. We're not beautiful. We're just not good enough, right? So that's the social context in terms of how we're still oppressed. We're oppressed about how we should look or how we don't look like, you know. In political context, well, we just don't have any power then because we're relegated from the beginning of time. And so, as I mentioned earlier, how non-black women, how they also have joined this cause. And again, they too, as they were oppressed, but they have joined this cause too, and oftentimes have caused women of color then to be, economically oppressed, in terms of jobs, access to better positions. We're blocked many times in the workplace by non black women. We're going to get to the other side in a minute. And so we have no political bargain rights. We don't have any, even though white women, they for a long time did not have it, but the moment they did get it, it's almost like they forgot that. And history, if we're not careful, will omit them from their involvement in the demise, if you will, of black women or women of color. And I think we need to really bring awareness to this in a loving and a kind way to say, you know what, this happened. And, we don't need this to continue to happen. We need to look at it and call it out for what it is and why it has been that way. But then why does it need to continue? I think we need to look at that. So then that's the history. So I was just giving a summary then as to the beginning of this thing, and the inception of this, if you will. So then what about, women who oppress other women of color? Well, where did they learn that? Right? Think about it, right? So white women had to learn how to come out of their oppression. So they joined the patriarchy side and they followed along. They went along with that. Well, here's the thing. Black women do the same thing because they want to remember this all started because of what? Wealth, power, and greed. So black women, they also want wealth, power, and you get greedy when you get a little bit of that stuff, right? You want to grow. And of course, remember, you want to be like your white counterparts. You want to feel like you're good enough. In fact, history shows that even from in Sudan, Nubia, North and Southern Egypt, it shows that when there was an invasion, when the imperialists came in, and of course when the social class, came out of when they raped black women or when they sold them and they raped them, then this new social class was formed. It shows that those lighter hue people, they hated their black mothers and they thought they treated their black mothers and black people worse than their white colonialists and white rulers. That is history. So the lighter hue folks, they felt like they who were black and they felt like they were better than their black mothers that gave birth to them. They felt like they were better than their black people that they came out of. And they inflicted more pain, more harm, more damage, right? More pillaging than the white colonialists themselves. So We've learned this early. We've learned this, and guess what? This stuff becomes generational down the line. So that leads me now into stories about Black women oppressing other Black women. So we no longer have to worry or guess, my God, why is this person oppressing me? And here's the thing. I promise you, I guarantee you that they themselves perhaps not even aware as to why they're doing this. They just do it. Hmm? Well, I want to play a little clip for you. Um, Her name is, I'll play this clip. This was on a major talk show. Her name is Julie Black and Jan Becker. They were having this roundtable talk, and they were talking about the Pope, who said that he was not willing to respect that Indigenous people, the treatment of Indigenous people in Canada. He said he wasn't willing to say he was sorry. This was back in 2015. And so they were having this roundtable talk about many things about race and and really women, how women are affected. So that's why this is so appropriate, or why this relates to the topic tonight. It's a YouTube clip, and what I want you to listen for is how Julia Black, the Black one, was talking to another one of the panelists, right? Jeanne Jeanne Becker, and several times when Julie Black was talking, Jan Becker, the white woman, then um, she interrupted Julie Black many times. Now, before you get into this, I remember I prefaced earlier that oftentimes when a Black woman speaks up for herself, or tries to better herself, or just try to find her place, that oftentimes we're seen as either aggressive. Oh, why are we crying? We're just being overly dramatic. I talked about that, right? Okay. Now, in this clip, Julia Black and Jean Becker were talking about, the Pope and his position that he took. And so I want you to listen for how Jean Becker, talks over Julie Black and interrupts her and basically was bullying her, live in this talk show. But listen to how Julie Black responded. So I want you to listen.
Tell us about the first time you were called something derogatory and the circumstances around it.
Am I allowed to say it?
It's up to you. If you're comfortable saying it, you say it. If you're not, you can.
I mean, I don't.
That's not the clip. Hang on one second. Play
It's important for us to really look at what book is going to have Canada open their eyes to what is happening on today. And yes, we celebrate and we heal and we kumbaya and we light.
But Julie, what about what's happening with ourselves? I mean, this is we've got to change the world, but people are really, there are a lot of screwed up people in the world.
There's a lot of colonial privilege.
There's a lot of people
happening.
that really
this room excluded, of course. And this studio excluded.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start that again, and I want you to hear Julie Black. She's a Black woman, and then listen to Jeanne Becker just interrupted her and talked over her.
It's important for us to really look at what book is going to have Canada open their eyes to what is happening on today. And yes, we celebrate and we heal and we kumbaya and we light.
But Julie, what about what's happening with ourselves? I mean, this is we've got to change the world, but people are really, there are a lot of screwed up people in the world.
There's a lot of colonial privilege.
There's a lot of people that really
this room excluded, of course.
And
this studio excluded.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that have to work on themselves. I mean, when we
there's
see
a lot of people who
sit
in their cottages in their homes and don't have an experience like others and think that it's, well, let me swipe my Visa card and make a donation, but I don't live this experience. What are we doing to change the current circumstances? We just had a Pope say he's not saying I'm sorry to Indigenous Canadians when he said that in 2015. It is happening right now.
I'm not saying
it's got to change. Yes, we forgive. I believe in Jesus.
But why are you attacking me, Julie? Why are you attacking me? No, I totally get what you're saying, and I have.
Hold on, we're live right now. Why are you attacking me?
I'm not attacking.
The truth hurts. I didn't say anything to attack you, Jeannie Becker. I said nothing about Jeannie Becker.
No, I'm just saying
Did I say anything about Jeannie Becker?
I just feel that you're speaking to me like I don't believe that. I totally get what you're saying.
Let me tell you what you just said. I feel like. So whatever you're feeling, take it to the altar, because I'm not the one that's responsible for your feelings.
Wow. Wow. So here, this woman, Julie Black, and she's an activist. She's in Canada. She's Canadian, and she was speaking up about the Indigenous persons in Canada that were mistreated, of course, by white colonials and colonials, and and she was just saying how the Pope said he wasn't going to say sorry. He was not going to acknowledge that. We're not even speaking of women in particular, but of course we know women were included. And this woman, Jeanne Becker, she's a white woman, and she interrupted Julie Black several times, and she became tearful. This white woman became tearful and saying she was being attacked. When really, what Julie Black was doing was just trying to shed light on the gravity of the situation, the impacts of it today still. And Jan Becker took it personal as if she was being attacked, when really what Julie Black was just trying to do was just explain the gravity of the situation over time, and she took it personal. So that's how this is one way how Black women are oppressed. So we when we speak up about issues of discrimination or issues of race, racism that affects us, we're labeled as we're attacking, we're bullying, we don't understand, and so Julie Black was well within her rights of humanity. So human rights to say, hey, I'm not attacking you. I'm just simply sharing with you the facts. And so she was sharing the facts just like she was with other persons at the table, and those other persons they were all white. They did not take the position that Jean Becker did, and even the audience. You can hear the audience. They supported Julie Black because they recognized what Jean Becker was in fact doing, right? And so these are some of the things that have happened and that still continues today. So what about my own stories, right? My own story. So even recently, I'll share with you, and again, I promise to redact this as much as possible. But even recently, I went to a conference, and I was sitting with a group of women, and we were panelists. I was one of the panelists on this for this conference, and what so this one woman said, "So I am so and so," and she says, "So," and I guess by this time they had all introduced themselves. I was the last person there, so or to show up really or come to the table, and I was asked, "So what's your name and what do you do? What are you going to talk about?" So I introduced myself, I'm Keisha Henry, I'm a licensed psychotherapist, so I'll be speaking, somewhat about, mental health. And the other women were happy. And the woman who actually asked me, she was from a Hispanic background. And the other woman across from me, she is, I believe she's Black. I'm not sure if she's African American or where she's from, but she was Black. And then the woman who responded the way in which I'm about to share, she's a white female. And her response was, "Well, I'm certain that all of us have something to impart." That's what she said. So the other one were really happy and excited about me being there and what I'll be speaking about and my position really. And so they were supportive of me and excited about me. And the white female said, "Oh, well, she did not even bother to say, well, wow, that's nice," or no, no social etiquette. It was not welcoming or warming. It was more like, hmm, I mean, how would you take her response to me? Well, I'm sure we all here have something to impart and to provide. I did not get a welcome. "Hey, Keisha, nice to meet you. Great that you're going to be talking about that." Nothing like that, right? And so, you know, um, when I was in college, one of my professors said, "You can always tell the size of a person by what they get upset about or what they become activated or reactive to." And I saw that, and I said to myself, "So what?" And in my mind, I'm saying to myself, "No, I did not feel an imposter syndrome because I know I had every right to be there." Okay. And I felt my heart palpitating, stress, right? Now, that's a form of microaggression, is it not? Well, I felt my heart palpitating. And, there's research that shows that persons of color, women of color, how we oftentimes with microaggression, we take in so much of that, it becomes unhealthy. That our length of life is what they call it. The length of life, LOL, is decreased because we have these microaggressions. Now, I felt my heart palpitating, and I'm like, so what am I going to do? So what I decided to do was to smile. I remember President Obama, right? Whether you like him or not. I remember when he was in the White House, he was attacked a lot of times, whether he was giving a speech or whatever, and he never responded verbally. What he did was just smile. He smiled because humor reduces stress. He smiled a lot of times, and I really liked that about him. I don't like, there's certain things I did not like, but I liked his response when he was being heckled or when he was being disrespected. And I did the same thing. I just smiled at her. And then the woman who was sitting across from me, I said, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And she says, I'm going to go with you. And I just thought that was way cool. That was dope. I was like, look at that. But I recognized that I was being bullied in that moment by a white female. She was trying to oppress my speech. She was trying to oppress basically, who I am and what I'm there about. It's almost like they should not be supporting me. They should not be uplifting me to do what I was there, what we're all there to do, because it was a women's conference. I'm like, wow, of all places. And I'm being oppressed right there at the table by another woman. But in this instance, it happened to be a white woman. So, yeah, these things happen. These things happen. How about some other stories? So I share with you a clip, right? And I shared with you a recent, this just happened like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Like, yeah, so 21st century, and this stuff is still happening. All right. So I'll tell you one last story. So I remember, growing up in this county. When I say growing up, I mean in my career in social work. And of all places, you find women oppressing, and this is a woman of color that I was oppressed by. And in social work, you find that women of color who have, risen to the ranks of administrators or executive persons, and they're bullying you, an underling, if you will, a subordinate, just because they can. But is it just because they can? Or is it because they're really unaware as to why they're doing this? But I remember growing up in this county and working, and I worked in various positions. And I won't say what it was, just institution, because I'm aware that this podcast will get out and persons will hear it. But I'm going to share my story about it. And as an underling, I remember being promoted to a particular department, and I was working for a woman of color. And I remember that just the orientation piece was great. Learning the nuances of the position, because I, come from one supervisor position to another, and so I was learning this new area. Of course, you have to give room and time for that. So then, one of the ways I experience oppression is when I try to, because I mean, you watch, and everyone wants to have upward mobility in their careers, and you want to better yourself, right? I mean, who does not want to better themselves? And I mean, I don't know of any such person, right? And so I watch to see how, there are different seminars or different trainings that, I could attend. And for every time I wanted to go to one, oh, I wasn't allowed. I wasn't allowed to go. Well, why is that? Well, that's not for your level. Okay, no, you have to be at this level or pay grade to go. You just couldn't go. And so then I start asking questions. And when I start asking questions around why I can't go, it's the more pushback that I received. It's the more I was penalized on, certain aspects of my work. Certain aspects of my works were being, what's the word? Like, you were being nitpicked about, or it's just not up to par. And it was before. It was before. It was before. But suddenly you start asking questions because you want to understand how you can become better. It's almost like you're getting shoved further into the corner. I remember another instance where I applied for a position. I wanted to be promoted again. Once again, notice, right? This is employment. And I'm talking about, how, because I want to grow. And remember, over time, we're pushed in corners politically, socially, right? And economically. And I have faced that, right? And so here's another instance where I remember applying to go to a higher position, and there, of course, there are a lot of persons that were applying. I mean, I know some of the people that applied for the promotion, and I remember the person charged was a white female, and and then when I, of course, and the person that they hired did not have the equivalent to my experience, and did not have wasn't equivalent in experience or education. And when I asked why I did not get the position, I was told because I don't have any experience with planning, just planning. I didn't have the experience. And I'm like, that's a technical aspect of a job. Like, anybody can learn how to plan. Anyone can be sent to a training. I can retool like everyone else, and right. And this was done by a white female, and the person who got the promotion was a white female. So I know what it's like to have been in environments where socially I was barred, economically, I'm barred because, I don't have, and of course, politically, what bargaining power did I have? Who could I talk to? Had none. The ceiling was just boom, it was set, right? So these actions have impact over time. And so women with tears is a real thing. It's a real thing. Now I have to flip the script. So I have to talk about my positive sides because those are the negative aspects of, you know, being a woman of color with tears. But I want to flip the script on that. So I'm going to flip the script now, and then we're going to pause, take our last 1 or 2 minutes break. Then we're going to talk about what I have done and what others can do. Okay. So here's the good side. So the good side is that I mentioned before talking about my mentors, Sharon Cohen. Do you have any mentors out there? A couple of days ago, it was Teachers Appreciation Day. I was listening to my meditation, and it was sending out love and kindness to teachers in our lives. Whether that was elementary school or middle school, high school. And if you've read my book, Healing of the Heart, you know that my adolescent years were very, very rough time. It just was because I was transitioning from one country to another and I just lost friends. Man, that's pretty hard. And I lost really good teachers. And when I came to this country, most of my teachers were white females. And, I mean, I had struggles. So I had a culture shock. I mean, I had all kinds of shocks going on. And so they were talking about Teachers Appreciation Day, and I mentioned that to say, we do have good people in our lives, we do, and it's unfortunate that history continues to repeat itself, and in these oppressive ways, and we just need to really bring awareness, bring this consciousness, have consciousness about how we treat other people. How women are really treating other women. It is pretty impactful. It really, really is. It's very hurtful. So I have good moments though, and the two persons I mentioned, I remember I mentioned talking about Sharon Cohen, and I remember when I went to do my first placement, and there were a lot of other students that applied for the placement, and she selected me. And I asked her, I said, "Why did you select me? You could have chosen any other persons." And she says, "You know what? I just really felt a strong connection." Listen to what she said. I felt a strong connection with what you were already doing, and I just felt like this would have been a good place for you. She said she felt a strong connection. Now, she didn't say, well, obviously she looked at my resume. I'm sure she did. And I mean, she didn't have access to my grades, but she had access to my schoolwork, my papers and my process recordings and different things I've done before. So yeah, I'm sure she looked at those things, those technical aspects of my presentation of who I am and what I can do. But what she said was she felt a connection to me, and she felt like this is where I belong, and that she wanted to mentor me. Right? This is what she said. And years later, when I ask her that question, she still says the same answer. So I know it's true. It's really true. And she always said to me, "You know what, Keisha? I really have to talk about her." She said to me, "I believe one day that you're going to have your own private practice." I'm looking at her like, "Lady, I need to graduate first. Please, just let me get past that." And no, she says, "No." She says, "I believe because, when I had that placement already, if you read my book, I was a teen mom. So, belief in myself was very little. I promise you, it was low, very, very low. And she didn't know that much about me. Later on, as I, built rapport with her, she learned that about me. And she said, "You know what? I believe that your story, your life story will be of good use to your future clients. And I believe that you're going to be of tremendous help to other women." This is what she said. And this was 19 years ago. Sharon Cohen. Yep. She is the patient services manager at Leukemia Lymphoma Society. You should look her up. She's amazing. This is what she said to me, and she's a white woman, and I can call her now. She's now in California. She always says, "Keisha, remember, we're 3 hours behind. I haven't had my coffee yet." Right? I got to wrap this podcast up. Right? So, and Donna Donato, love her, and she's always encouraging me. I remember when I didn't go back to law school, she said, "You know what? That's okay. That experience is going to count for something." She says, "You're very methodical, you're very anal, and you speak well, and you're very articulate, and you have a love for people, and she gave me also a chance when that was my second placement, and she encouraged me, and she says, this is a thing that she said to me one day when I was sitting in a session with her. Says, you know what, you're gonna make an amazing clinician therapist. She said that, and again I'm thinking, who, right? And so I have these women that they're still in my corner. They're still in my corner. I still consult with them. And if they're listening tonight, thank you so much, both of you. I appreciate you for life, for life, for life. And so, these women, they're well aware about the history that I spoke about tonight, and they have made a difference in my life. And that's why I continue to make a difference in the lives of women and girls, regardless if they look like me or not. And so, yeah, I'm going to pause here, take a break, come back, look at the impacts of what we're talking about tonight and what you can do. What we're going to play? We're going to play, I don't know. Let's see. A good story. So, from what we've talked about tonight, did you feel any of that? I love to always talk about feelings because feelings are important, right? They drive us. They drive a lot of what we think and what we do. Because remember, a portion of thought. I always like to teach a portion of thought. Right? It's like a dollar bill. Cut it in half. A portion of thought equals emotions. And so, what we're talking about, I'm not sure, how you feel about this. Did it generate any kind of emotions in you tonight? I hope it did. I hope it stirred you because we need to understand our history so we don't continue to repeat that or allow others to repeat it with us. We need to stop it. So, what are some things that you can do? Because obviously, from what we talked about tonight, if I were to summarize those things, right, a lot of times as women, we're excluded, we're belittled, we're gossiped about, and we're sabotaged. And before you know it, then we do these things to ourselves and to other women. We need to stop that. So, and from these kind of behaviors, we have affective disorders, right? I mean, oh my gosh, anxiety, depression, right? People are self harming. I mean, I remember I used to cry before I go to work. I promise you can ask my husband. I used to dread going to work sometimes. I'm like, Lord, do I have to go? I used to like, what is my future? I felt like, I remember after I got in the third promotion, I'm like, Lord, did I make a mistake? Here I am in this job and I'm not even happy. I'm getting more money, but I'm not even happy. Did I make a mistake? Why am I being treated this way? And, I had to draw back on my spiritual, belief, my spiritual expression, you know, which gives me a larger space to find meaning in my situation in those times. Remember, I opened up this podcast with that, and I'm going to end with that because that's my strength. And remember, science shows that it's the most effective coping mechanism is drawing on your spirituality. And I invite you to, if you have any spiritual contamination or harm in your life, that to work that out. Find you know, a reputable, um, non-judgmental therapist, someone that you can trust to talk with about this, to work that in your life. Because when you can connect with your inner person, that's where your power lies. Okay. So what can you do? Right. Well, number one, speak up. I talked about speaking up. It was hard, because the more I spoke up, the more I got pushed. But you can speak up. Why? You can calmly, assertively, let this other woman or woman know how their behavior is affecting you and what you'd like them to do differently. Maybe sometimes you have to bring support to do that. Maybe you need another person or another woman or someone else to help you to speak to that person that's really inflicting pain on you, that's either gossiping about you or belittling you or even sabotaging you. I mean, this stuff is real, you know? So speaking up is the first thing, in my work, I often do role plays with women. How are you going to talk to this person? Let's role play this out, and it's awkward, but it helps. It helps to give you the strength and it helps you to see yourself doing this, speaking up for yourself. I really hope I'm helping someone tonight because I have had to do this, a couple of times, to be honest, not easy. Maybe you're getting this in your family. Maybe you have a woman in your family that's bullying you. Maybe you have an aunt. Maybe you have a cousin. Let's be real. This stuff really happens. Okay. It's not a joke, right? Again, seek support, whatever that support may look like. And support comes in many forms. Okay. Hopefully, this podcast is one of them. If you're in a professional setting, though, and this stuff is happening, you might want to document the behavior. People used to laugh and say, man, you're the queen of writing stuff down. You have to, though, because, well, in social work, if you didn't write it, it didn't happen. You got to document, keep a record of any instances of oppression or harassment that includes dates and times, what was said and what was done. Why? Because if you need be, you can escalate the stuff to HR and other authorities. And you know what? I had to do that once in my career. I did. And it's a good thing that I journal all the time anyway. So it's a good idea, and keep that stuff in, to yourself, because you may really need that to get the support from HR or any other authorities to help you to get protection for yourself. And again, if this stuff is happening in the workplace, but workplaces are pretty strict about harassment now. I mean, depending on the culture, but you still want to have a way of empowering yourself and protecting yourself. But if any behaviors persist or escalates, again, you want to get HR or your management involved. Why? Because the workplace really is responsible for providing a safe and respectful workplace for you. And again, you're going to have some people going to push back on this. I don't care. It doesn't matter, because you're the one going to end up on medication. I can't tell you how many folks I've seen in the workplace that they're depressed. They have to go on anxiety medication, blood pressure medication, because they have a female boss that's oppressing them like no other. Like, seriously. Yeah, it happens. And you know what, too? Don't forget about, others. Educate others, too. Like, when you get help, if you know or see someone experiencing something, speak up to them. Ask them. Remember when I was asking my cousin, I was asking her questions. Ask. Ask. How are you doing? I see you're crying. I see you're sitting by yourself today. Provide education. Bring awareness to them, too. Let them know that there's a way out of this and they can get help. Last but not least, focus on self-care. Sometimes we're in rough, my God, we're just really in hard environments, and sometimes we have no one on the inside. So what do you do when you're outside there? Dealing with depression can be emotionally draining, honestly. I mean, are you a person of color? Then you should know exactly what I'm talking about. Dealing with depression on a day-to-day basis, oh my God, it's emotionally draining and stressful. So it's really essential that you take care of yourself and prioritize your self-care activities. I'm big on exercising. That's a big deal. You probably see some of my weightlifting videos. Meditation. I often talk about meditation and prayer. I talk about that all the time because, again, I already gave you research on that. And spending time with your loved ones, maybe your kids. And if they're an irritant, limit your time. But, good friends, go bowling, go do something. And remember that women, we have a responsibility to each other. Honestly, let's not repeat history. Let's continue something new or different. Let's continue to do good, not continue this harmful history that we've had for so many years. So, with that, thank you for listening to this podcast. I went over by like 5 minutes. I thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, reach out to me on this, podcast. Send me a note or something. Or again, my email address is k.henry@nbhi-llc.net. And before I forget, we have our Teen Girls Summer Support Group that's beginning on June 10th through July 29th. It's a big deal for us, our second year doing this. You can find our event on eventbrite.com, New Beginning Healing Institute. You can find our link there or go to one of our social media platforms, New Beginning Healing Institute on Facebook, Instagram, or even TikTok. You can find our information there. Listen, thank you for being so gracious to me tonight. It was a hard topic for me, but I enjoyed every bit of it. Blessings, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
So that